All right, let's talk about something that can really trip people up in accounting. When a company sells a bundle of stuff, say a phone and a service plan, how on earth do they decide how much revenue goes to the phone versus the plan? This is all about step 4 of IFRS 15, and trust me, getting it right is absolutely crucial. So let's crack this code together.
So as you know, IFRS 15 gives us this famous 5-step model for recognizing revenue. We've already identified the contract, figured out all the promises we've made, and determined the total price. Now we land on the star of today's show, step 4. This is where the magic and the math happens. We're going to take that total price and slice it up across all those individual promises. This is where precision really matters.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to frame the problem as a puzzle. Then, we'll cover the golden rule for solving it. After that, we'll dive into the tricky part, what to do when prices are a mystery. And we'll look at the 3 main ways to estimate them. We'll also tackle some curveballs like discounts and finish up with how to make sure you've actually gotten the allocation right. So let's start with the puzzle itself. Think of it like this. You have one total price for a contract, the whole revenue pie, if you will. But you've promised to deliver multiple things. The challenge of step 4 is figuring out how to slice that pie so that each piece fairly represents the value of what you're giving the customer. Now, this entire process is built on one single foundational concept, the stand-alone selling price, or SSP. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's the price you charge for that good or service if you sold it all by itself, completely on its own. This SSP is the anchor for everything else we're about to do. So, now that we have our anchor, the standalone selling price, we can talk about the golden rule for actually doing the allocation. The rule is actually pretty simple in theory. You allocate the total contract price based on the relative standalone selling prices of each item. So let's say a phone's SSP is $700 and a service plan's is $300. The phone makes up 70% of that total standalone value, so it gets 70% of the contract price. Simple, right? And of course, the best, most reliable proof of an SSP is the actual price you see when that item is sold on its own. But you knew it couldn't be that easy all the time, right? What happens when there's just no observable price tag? Maybe you never sell that particular good or service on its own. This is where things get interesting, and it's honestly the biggest challenge most people face with step 4. And that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you figure out a standalone price for something that never actually stands alone? Maybe it's a new feature that's always bundled in. Well, the good news is the accounting standard saw this problem coming and gave us a specific toolkit to handle it. That toolkit has 3 different methods you can use to estimate a standalone selling price when you can't just look it up. Let's break them down one by one. The 3 approaches are the adjusted market assessment, the expected cost plus a margin, and the residual approach. You can even mix and match them if it makes sense. But that last one, the residual approach, comes with some very strict rules we need to talk about. First up is the market assessment approach. This one is all about looking outward. You're basically playing detective. You look at what your competitors are charging for similar things, and then, and this is key, you adjust that price to fit your reality. Are you the premium brand or the budget option? Are your costs different? Are you selling in a totally different market? You have to consider all that to land on a solid estimate. The second method is pretty much the opposite. It's an inside job. It's a bottom-up approach. You figure out all the costs you expect to incur to deliver that promise, and then you add a reasonable profit margin on top. But that margin can't just be pulled out of thin air. It has to make sense for your market, your industry, and your company. Okay, method number 3, the residual approach. Now, listen closely because this one is a last resort. You can only use it if the item's price is super variable or if it's so new that a price hasn't even been set yet. What you do is take the total contract price and subtract the known standalone prices of everything else. Whatever is left over, the residual, becomes the estimated price for that one mystery item. This is exactly why you can't use it for something like a cell phone that clearly has an identifiable value. So, we have our toolkit for figuring out the standalone prices. But life gets messy, right? What happens when you've got discounts or variable payments thrown into the mix? Let's see how we handle those. When it comes to a discount, the starting point, the general rule is simple. You just spread that discount proportionally across everything in the deal based on those standalone selling prices we talked about. But of course, there's an important exception. This makes way more sense with an example. So let's say we sell 3 products, A, B, and C, in a bundle for 100 euros. If you bought them separately, their standalone prices would add up to 110 euros. So we've definitely got a discount to deal with here. The math is easy enough. The total standalone value is 110 euros, but the customer is only paying 100 euros. That leaves us with a 10 euro discount that has to be allocated. Now, the default rule would tell us to spread that 10 euros across all three products. But what if we have a clue that tells a different story? And here's where that exception kicks in. If you have solid, observable evidence that a discount really belongs to just one or two items, you can allocate it directly to them. In our case, we know that products B and C are often sold together for 70 euro. Well, their combined standalone price is 80 euro, so that's exactly our 10 euro discount right there. This evidence tells us to apply the entire discount to just B and C, and leave product A at its full price. You know what? The logic for variable payments is pretty much the same. Generally, you'd spread any variable amount proportionally across all the items. However, if that variable amount, like a bonus for hitting a specific target, clearly relates to just one of your promises, you can allocate it entirely to that single item, as long as it still makes sense for the contract as a whole. All right, we've gone through the rules, the methods, the exceptions. Now let's talk about what might be the most important part of all, using your professional judgment and doing some final checks to make sure your allocation actually makes sense in the real world. You should always do a couple of quick sanity checks. First, if the total price the customer is paying is more than the sum of your standalone prices, that's a huge red flag. It could mean your SSPs are just too low, or worse, you might have missed a performance obligation entirely. Another thing to watch out for are things like non-refundable setup fees. That's usually not a separate service. It's just a prepayment, and its value needs to be spread across the actual services you're going to provide later. And this, right here, is what it all boils down to. Step 4 is not a mechanical plug-and-play exercise. The estimation methods are just tools in your toolkit. The standard demands that you use sound, supportable judgment to get to an answer that truly reflects the deal. You have to be able to stand behind your logic. So, you've done all the work, you've followed the steps, but you look at the final numbers and they just don't feel right. What do? Well, the standard basically has a common sense check. If your final allocation assigns, say, almost zero revenue to a brand new smartphone in a bundle, that's a pretty clear sign that something in your process is flawed and you need to go back and rethink it. And that really brings us to the final big picture question. Getting step 4 right is what separates properly recognized revenue from what's basically just a guess. It's all about making sure the story your financial statements tell is an accurate reflection of the value you delivered promise by promise. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.